I think everybody can see the screen now.
Yes.
And let's get the meeting started. And I want to welcome everyone here and thank you for sharing your evening with us. We are once again having a Friday night lecture, and this time it's on Zoom, and we are being recorded. So for those who are new to us, this organization's been in existence since 1935, and that's 86 years now, old now. We've had some distinguished members, and to your left is Dr. Hodges. He's the one that founded it. He and his students founded the organization. And we've had John Elliott, Dr. John Elliott, and Lon Hancock as members, and there's many, many more distinguished members. We would, under normal circumstances, be holding our lectures at Kramer Hall, and hopefully we might start that or resume it again in January of next year, so of the upcoming year. So keep your fingers crossed. GSOC's activities, well, it's what the Friday night lecture that we're attending now. There's been field trips, and we had 4 wonderful field trips this summer. There's a holiday party being planned. The March annual banquet in March is in the planning stages. We didn't have a summer picnic this year because of COVID. Perhaps next year we might be able to have one. And we do maintain a library, and there's some copies, digital copies of our field guides, our old field guides, and we take on special projects too. This view shows a couple GSOCers looking out a landscape, and our field trips are led by experts. They are inexpensive, 1 day or several days long. We camp, we stay at motels, and we try to carpool to keep a caravan at a manageable level. Our fees for membership, as you can see on the screen, are very reasonable. Then the cast of characters who run this thing are pictured here. I'm on the left, and Scott, our member at large, is going to give our talk tonight. I mentioned field trips, so here are the 4 field trips that we ran this year, and you can see their dates. We have at least that many more we could run next year. So keep tuned, stay tuned for that one. We also have a presence in Meetup, and we started again, and we'll have it the 3rd week of the month. We'll have another in-person meetup at the Woodstock Wine and Deli, and we'll have a show and tell, because we've had 7 or 8 people show up, and hopefully I've got, looks like we got a little bit more coming this month. We have a monthly newsletter, and we have a Zoom that is a GSOC Zoom meetup that is very popular, and that's the 4th weekend of the month. So sign up for them. GSOC has a Facebook presence as well as a Twitter, as well as maintains a Twitter page. And now we've kind of embarked on a new kind of project, if you will, a special project. We've set up the GSOC Beverly Boat PSU Graduate School Fund, and we have named it for her because of her contributions to GSOC. And I was given a little message from the treasurer today, and in a month of November, we've had 11 people donate $990 to this scholarship fund. I want to thank you very much.
Oh yeah.
A heartfelt thank you for that. And it goes for the kids really do appreciate it at the school. I'm sorry I call them kids. They should be graduate students. And I'm done. So enjoy the lecture, and I'll stop sharing the screen, and here we go.
Okay. Our presenter tonight is one of our most beloved speakers. So Dr. Scott Burns earned 2 degrees at Stanford and his PhD at University of Colorado. Now, since he retired in 2013, I haven't seen him slow down very much. And so he's still on the go, still teaching classes after 52 years, a half a century, and he's been still teaching. I believe he's got the same enthusiasm he always did. He serves on many boards, including our GSOC board, which we're delighted to have him. And he is a world-class geologist. Although he's a world-class geologist, he's also a sixth-generation Oregonian. And so he's very much rooted here in Oregon, and he's delighted to present to you tonight. He's also an author of Cataclysms on the Columbia. Got a copy of it right here. And he's very well qualified to talk to you about his topic tonight. So I'm going to ask everybody to give a warm welcome to Dr. Scott Burns.
Well, thank you very much, Sheila. And it's always fun to talk to GSOC. Now I'm on the board, and it's kind of fun. And I just am amazed at the quality of the board, the leadership. You've got the whole board are leaders in many different ways, and it's lots of fun. And I love GSOC and have been a member now for 30 some years. So tonight I'm going to do two things related to the Missoula floods. Number one, I want to talk about the Ice Age flood geological trail, and then also related to a big boulder, a rhyolite boulder that we found in Lake Oswego. That why is this in the Willamette Valley? You shouldn't be finding rhyolite here. And we believe it was brought in by the Missoula floods. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then the last part is I want to show you a video for a new visitor center about the Missoula floods that we are going to be starting. Well, we already have started. We have a foundation in Tualatin. And this is the Lower Columbia chapter of the Ice Age Flood Institute. So we just got to hope and pray that all of the technology works. And so we're going to start out and just see if I can, oops, okay. Oh, hold on. Don't want that. I'm going to see if I can share screen here. Okay, now, see if this is going to work. Okay, it's working so far. Let's go over here and here. And then see if they'll.
There you go. You did it.
All right. So can everybody see that?
We see the first slide of your PowerPoint.
All
yes.
right. Our miracles do happen. We got to have two major miracles tonight. This is the first of them. So this is a big boulder that we found in Lake Oswego. And so I'm going to focus in on the first 10 minutes or so about this. But and I gave a talk at the GSA just recently. Let's see. We can get it. Switch to the next. Hold on. There we go. Oops. That didn't work.
Okay, you stopped the screen sharing. There you go.
Okay, so the focus, so everybody knows the story of the Missoula floods. 15 to 18,000, now we're pushing it back 15 to 19,000 years ago. The Pend Oreille Trench, or the Purcell Trench, the Pend Oreille Glacier came down, dammed up the Clark Fork River, forming Glacial Lake Missoula, and then it broke, and all of that water catastrophically was released in 3 days, scoured eastern Washington, creating the Channel Scablands, came back into the Columbia River at Wallula Gap, came down the gorge, deepened it, came down to Portland, hit the West Hills or the Tualatin Mountains of Portland, some of it went into the ocean, some of it went through Lake Oswego, scouring it out and forming it and filling up the Tualatin Valley, and the rest of it went down between West Lynn and Oregon City and filled up the Willamette Valley. The water eventually all went out into the ocean, the dam refilled, the lake refilled, and then we had another flood, and we had 40 floods that made it to Portland, 40 floods to Wallula Gap, and maybe 89, 90 plus up through Spokane. All this idea came through from J. Harlan Bretz, and many of you have heard me talk about him. The amazing thing is he went against the thinking of all of the geologists of that day. And they said you were wrong because uniformitarianism says that you can't have catastrophic events. Well, this was one, and eventually he outlived all the detractors. That's another story for another time. But the floodwaters, as they came into Portland, came out of the gorge at maybe 80 miles an hour, and then they reduced as they came into Portland, but they formed all of the landforms that we have, Alameda Ridge Pendant Bar here, the Mill Plain Pendant Bar, all of the gravel bars that we've got. But that water came through, right through Lake Oswego. Look at the large fan all the way out towards Sherwood, formed by the 40 floods coming through. And so it's right here, right at the tip of where that arrow is, that we found this boulder. And we believe that it came through here and was deposited with a lot of other boulders like that. And so this is what downtown Portland would have looked like, up to 400 feet elevation, with water, thank goodness for the Photoshop. And then Swan Island, which was the water going back out, had a big eddy current out here, formed that, and then Giles Lake in that area. So the water came through and filled up the Tualatin Valley, through Lake Oswego, went through Tualatin, and then filled up the valley, and then it came back out. And it came back, the water came out through Gaston, through the Tonkin Scablands, back through Tualatin, and a little of it also through Lake Oswego. And so we talk about Tualatin as being crossroads of the Ice Age floods. The floodwaters came in, filled up the Tualatin Valley, the floodwaters came back out afterwards. So here's a picture of Lake Oswego. The actual site where we found this boulder is right up here in the left-hand corner. And then Bridgeport Mall is out here, and then this big, huge fan out there we talked about before. And where Bridgeport Mall is, back in the early 90s, I used to take students into the big quarry that was here. And you could see these unbelievable foreset beds that are coming down here. Lake Oswego is to the right, Sherwood is to the left. It's showing us that all of that sediment that rode away in Lake Oswego was deposited out in this area. Now, in the Portland area, most of the rock that we have are Columbia River basalts, the dark black basalt that we have here, or the gray stuff is the boring lavas. So it's basalt, basalt, basalt. But now and then we will see white boulders. That's granite. And there's no granite around here. How did they get here? They were ice rafted erratics. When that dam that was holding up Glacial Lake Missoula broke, the first one had 50 cubic miles of ice. And some boulders had gotten encompassed into the ice. And then those icebergs would come down, and when they melted, that's how they were deposited in this area. The most famous of all of those is the Willamette Meteorite, which is found at 400 feet elevation in Willamette, just above West Lynn. And it's the most famous meteorite. You've heard me talk about that before. So the background. And so March and April, I got a telephone call from Jacob Parker, who was the superintendent of the rebuilding of Lakeridge Middle School, which is in Lake Oswego, the kind of the southwestern part of Lake Oswego. And he said, I got a big boulder out here. Could you come and check it out? And here is the boulder, and a good size, and an up close picture of this. And so he took a picture of that. And there's a site that you could go to with a picture of your rock, and it will tell you what a good guess is for the rock. And it's greenish, yellowish, brownish in color. And so we took it to the site, and here's another picture of it. And the first guess was that it was uranitite. Well, what is uranitite? That's called pitchblende. That is uranium-bearing ore. And he said, oh no, this is on a middle school campus. So he went to the principal and he said, what is going on here? And the principal said, that's not good. And so he said, we better get a geologist. And they got in touch with Rick and Sylvia Thompson, and they said, well, ask Scott. So I came over and looked at it, and I said, no, it is a chert-like rock, more of a rhyolite. And then I took a piece to Martin Streck, who's the chairman of our department, our mineralogist, and the specialist in Oregon for rhyolite. And he said, yeah, this is rhyolite, which is great, which meant that it was not a
uranium.
But the thing is, he and myself were saying, wait a second, what is this doing here in the Willamette Valley? Because there are no sources up and down the Willamette Valley or the coast. Well, there's some in the Coast Range, but not here for this rock. How did it get here? And it was found in the middle of all these big rocks that you can see here. There's Jacob out here. And these were all boulders. All of them were either Columbia River basalt or boring lava basalt. And he went through them one day, and he saw this greenish yellowish rock and said, wow, this is different. Let's take a picture of it. And so he found it just walking through the piles. He took a photo. I told you about the story. Erratite. And then he told the principal. The principal said, whoa, we don't want that here. That's not good. Get a geologist. So I visited in May of 2021. And then we got Martin Streck to identify it. And so we called it the Lakeridge Rhyolite Boulder. And as I mentioned before, it's rare on this side of the Cascades. And in fact, only one ice rafted erratic had been found in the whole valley, and that was by Ira Allison way back in the 1930s. And he never wrote down where he found it. So this is only the second one that we really believe it's here. And so how did it get moved here? That is the question. And I'll come back to that in a second. And so Skanska said, we need to have a press release for this. And then and the Lake Oswego School District said, yeah, let's join in. Let's get a whole bunch of talking heads talking about it. And then the principal at the junior high, Dr. Schultz, said, wait a second, let's turn this into a teachable moment. And I said, yay, let's do that. And so what happened was they tried to, so the middle school kids were either going in the morning or the afternoon. So half the kids came out in the morning to hear me talk about it. And then in the afternoon, the second group came in. That was their first class. And then they were going to have me talk to them for 10 minutes. And I told them about the formation of the Columbia River basalts and the floods that brought those in, the two volcanoes that are on either side of Lake Oswego. You have the one to the south and the one to the north, Mount Sylvania, and I've forgotten the name of the other one, doesn't matter. And then the Missoula Floods that carved out the lake and then also brought this boulder in. And so, but what happened in the afternoon was they tried to have a press conference with all these talking heads, me being one of them. But I started talking to the kids early, like it was 15 minutes before, and the TV stations were all there, and they were more interested in taking pictures and interviewing all the kids about this afterwards. They never did have the press conference. So here's a picture of me talking to the kids. There's Dr. Schultz off in the distance. That was May 17th. And this was the afternoon session that we had. In the end, they never did have the talking head, but it did get coverage there. So as I mentioned, I talked 10 minutes in the morning. I had 20 minutes of questions afterwards. And then in the afternoon, I again talked for 10 minutes. And then it went on for 30 minutes. And then we got coverage on 3 local TV stations, 2, 6, and 8. Then the UPI and ABC picked it up, so it went national. And the local newspapers picked it up. We were on the front page of the Lake Oswego Review, which is great. But the amazing thing was, we've been involved international, and a friend of mine in Borneo emailed me, said, Scott, you were in our paper, the Borneo Bulletin. And here is a picture of it in your rock in Oregon. And so wow. So we did get quite a bit of coverage. The interesting thing was this next week, the phone rang off the hook, everybody wanting me to come out and identify their boulders. And I've looked at some of them. Some of them are just the ice rafted ones, but a couple of this one, like this one right here up on Chehala Mountain at 400 feet elevation, is Rhyolite. And so we have a team of 3 students. I just took them out to see the boulder today, all seniors at Portland State, working with Martin Streck and myself. They're going to identify the Rhyolite boulder and these other ones. And then Martin knows exactly where all these sites are in Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon. And then we're going to try and match it up with them and say, this is where it came from. And then we got to figure out how to get it into the Columbia River. And then it bounced along the bottom as bed load I mean, with velocities up to 80 miles an hour, you can move big boulders like that. And it came down there. So that's our idea that we have there. And as I said, we 3 seniors that are working on this right now. So that is the story. You know, why did it move here? And then what we did is we moved it. So you can't go to the middle school. The middle school said, we don't want anything famous here. We don't want people coming up. So they just have a picture on the wall inside. So we moved it over to the Tualatin Heritage Center, where we have a whole collection of ice rafted erratics that are there. And then we have started the Tualatin Ice Age Foundation. And our dream is that we will eventually have a actual building in Tualatin for this. Tualatin, Crossroads of the Ice Age Floods, and covering 4 major topics. Number 1, the Ice Age floods in general, all the way from Missoula to the coast. Number 2, Ice Age floods in the Portland area, coming through Lake Oswego, filling up the Tualatin Valley, then coming back out. Number 3, the Native Americans that lived here. So Tualatin was primarily the Kalapuya tribe, and then the Athalati group of the Kalapuyas. And then lastly, what were the animals that lived here? The symbol of Tualatin is the mastodon, and you'll see it coming up in the video coming up in just a few seconds. And so we wanted to, in order to put together this visitor center. Right now, it is at the library. But in any time you open one of these videos or any of these centers, what you need to do is have a video. So we had a video made, and I'm in it, and then we have other members of the Tualatin Ice Age Foundation that are in there talking about the Missoula Floods. And so here we are moving. This is the middle school in the background. We moved that boulder, a big trailer, and then we moved it over to Tualatin. Then we took it out. We put it in the garden right on top of a few little plants down there. And here is our team. Yvonne is on here right now tonight. And so we are all members of the Tualatin Ice Age Flood Foundation. Brian Clopton over here, he's the guy who moved it for free. And so you can actually go see this boulder if you go to the Tualatin Heritage Center, which is right next to the police station. And so our visitor center is going to be part of the National Park Service. If you go into the library right now, you get a stamp that you have visited one of the visitor centers for the Ice Age Flood Geological Trail. And so that is our dream that we have got here. Here is the map of the Missoula Floods. And remember, we also had Missoula Floods that occurred before this 15 to 18,000 years ago, all the way through the Quaternary. So we just call them Ice Age Floods. And each one of these areas, we have a visitor center and lots of signs on all of the roads, all the way up to Missoula. And so in 2009, this was made into one of our newest national parks, the Ice Age Flood Geological Trail. Instead of going to see a mountain or valley, what you do is you follow a geological concept all the way from the ocean, all the way up to Missoula, Montana. That's one of the reasons why I rewrote the book called Cataclysms on the Columbia. And that's why we have the first visitor center, and probably the only one for Portland for this. And so it's at the library right now. You can come and see the mastodon. You can see other skeletons that we have there. We've got the video. Eventually, when the library is allowed to show you the video, you can come in and watch the video there. So that is our dream, that we will eventually have a visitor center. So that is the story of the Ice Age floods in Tualatin. And so now what I want to do, and you will have questions at the end, I'm going to see if we can work this out. What we are going to do is show you that video that you could see in Tualatin. And we're just loading it on here. And it was done by a very, very professional group. And hey, come on. There we go.
Welcome to Tualatin.
So can you guys see this? Let me know.
No, you're not screen sharing.
Okay.
Mother Nature.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. We're going to just,
Go through the screen share again.
all right. We're going to go through screen share. There we go. Okay. Okay. Let's try.
Yes. Yes, we see it.
Got to go back to, okay, here we go. And this is what you would see if you came to the library in our visitor center.
Welcome to Tualatin.
Can you hear it?
Crossroads of the
Yes.
ice flood. Inside, Mother Nature is shouting out to all of us that there is a story. First, we hope to show you how these ice age floods fashioned the area, not only locally, but then also all over the Pacific Northwest, 16,000 square miles in the area. And then secondly, what lived on the land? What were the animals and the plants that lived here during the time of the Ice Age floods until now? And then thirdly, the Native Americans. What were they like initially right after the floods, but then all the way to today and how they have lived off of the land. Join us as we tell the story of this incredible history here in Tualatin in the south part of Portland. This whole story of the Ice Age floods is one of the greatest geologic stories in history in North America. A professor called J. Harlan Bretz, who was a professor starting out at the University of Washington, would take his students to do work in eastern Washington. He would see these great valleys, but no water in them. They looked like they were formed by a large flood. He would also find huge waterfalls, but there's no water there today. And great coulees, like the Grand Coulee or the Moses Coulee or Seven Down Coulee. He called it the channeled scablands. And he said, wow, this had to have been formed by a large flood. And so in 1923, he published a paper. And he called it the Spokane Flood. This was not good for him because he went against the origin of landscapes by geologists of the day, because landscapes were formed slowly over a long period of time, not catastrophically. He was saying a big, huge flood came in. And secondly, they said, hey, where'd the water come from? He said, well, I don't know, maybe from the glaciers, but he didn't have a source. And so between 1923 and 1940, the geologists of the day were attacking Bretz and his idea of the Spokane Flood over and over and over again. But in 1940, at the meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Seattle, Washington, a guy named J.T. Pardee presented a paper about a lake called Lake Muslin, which is between that old lake and Spokane. You can see these incredible ripples that are 5 miles long, 50 feet high, one after another after another. Sure looks like to me that a large flood came through this particular area. He basically said, I have found the source for the water for Bretz's flood. Then in the next 15 to 20 years, people said, whoa, Bretz may be right. And all those geologists said, no, you're wrong. Eventually that took over. And in 1967, Bretz published a paper about the Missoula Flood. Bretz stuck to his guns. If you got good data, stick to it, even though you're going against every geologist of the day because you had broken uniformitarianism. That was very important. Then a guy named Richard Waite was out in Touchy, Washington, having lunch next to a canyon we call Burlingame Canyon, and he saw these different layers of sediments. And he said, whoa, there's sand on the bottom, silt on the top. They're what we call a graded bed. We call them rhythmites today. He counted them up. There were 40 of them. And he said, maybe we had 40 floods instead of one flood. We know today catastrophic events are very, very common. In the end, Bretz lived to be 98 years old. He outlived every detractor that said that he was wrong. And so we tell our students today, stick to your guns if you got good data. The ice dam came down in the Pend Oreille Valley, dammed up the Clark Fork River, which is draining western Montana. The size of that dam was 3 Space Needles, one on top of another, 1,700 feet from the bottom to the top. That was a lot of ice. It eventually broke up, and then once it did, The computer models say 3 to 4 days to break up. If you take all the flows of all of the rivers in the world, add them up in cubic meters per second, multiply by 10, that is the flow, 10 to the 18th meters per second. They are so big, and they do a huge amount of geologic work in a short period of time.
When the Missoula floodwaters came out of the Columbia River Gorge, they spread out to about a 200-mile alluvial fan or delta, dropping tons of rocks and gravel and sand. The largest rocks towards the mouth of the gorge, and then the smaller as it went into Portland and through Portland, then down through Lake Oswego and through Oregon City, where it filled the Tualatin Valley and the Willamette Valley.
These floodwaters followed the coulees, especially the Grand Coulee, which had a giant waterfall flow through the middle. Remnants of the erosion can be seen today at Dry Falls State Park in Washington. As the waters flowed south, they re-entered the Columbia River at a constriction called Wallula Gap on what is now the Oregon-Washington border. The water ponding upstream of Wallula Gap formed a lake that reached the Yakima and Walla Walla valleys. The floodwaters then passed through that gap and followed the Columbia River through the Columbia Gorge, widening and deepening it as it flowed up to depths of 700 feet. Evidence of this is seen by gravel deposits on the slopes. The water scoured away an ancient volcano in the gorge, leaving its core. Today, it is known as Beacon Rock. Near the mouth of the gorge, the water scoured the slopes up to 600 feet on the north side of Cape Horn and the south side at Crown Point. Because the soil was so saturated, a landslide caused a large block of Crown Point to drop during the last flood and deposited it upright at the bottom of the slope on the edge of the Columbia River. Today we call it Rooster Rock. The floodwaters entered the Portland Basin at velocities of 65 to 80 miles per hour, carrying abundant debris.
When it came into Portland, it hit 2 volcanoes, Rocky Butte and Prune Hill. And then the areas in back of it created huge depositions that we call pendant bars of sediments. We call it Alameda Ridge in Portland. In Washington and Vancouver, we call it the Mill Plain Pendant Bar that you have got. And in fact, the whole topography of Portland and Vancouver is all a result of the Missoula Floods.
And down in the Portland area, it flowed through what is now Lake Oswego, gouging another linear lake. If you look at it from the map, you'll see it's a long, narrow lake that was actually scoured by these floodwaters flowing through at high speeds. Willamette Falls is the second largest by volume waterfall in the United States, second only to Niagara. It is extremely important in the settlement of the West. Before the settlement of the West, the floods, and then through places like the Oregon City Gap, where it sped up again and eroded flat scablands on each side of the Willamette River near Willamette Falls. The one on the Oregon City side is called Kanema. It is a public area called the Kanema Scablands. And then on the west side, West Lynn, behind the West Lynn High School, is Camasia, which is a scabland.
The floodwaters entered the Portland Basin at velocities of 65 to 80 miles per hour, carrying abundant debris. As the floodwaters filled the Portland Basin, some waters continued northward into the Columbia Channel towards the ocean. Some entered and filled up the Tualatin Valley through what is now Lake Oswego and Tualatin, and some filled the Willamette Valley via the Willamette River that runs between what is now today Oregon City and West Lynn. These valleys filled up to an elevation of about 400 feet in the first flood. Floods that came later had successively less volumes. The waters left the Tualatin Valley to flow into the ocean through the Willamette Valley via the Tualatin River Valley through Tualatin, depositing large current ripples east of Tualatin. These ripples today can be seen at the Tonkin Scablands next to Tualatin and a gap near Gaston in the west of the valley. Coffee Lake is a depression in the Tonkin Scablands, carved by extreme erosion into the bedrock from fast-moving waters. The water eventually left the Willamette Valley via Willamette Falls, which is now Oregon City, and then to Portland to the Columbia River.
When all of the valleys were filled up to 400 feet above sea level, it started flowing back out. On the way out, it created different things that it had created on the way in. And one very large thing it made was Willamette Falls. This falls was created as a receding waterfall. In the Portland area, it sheared off a nice flat platform to build downtown Portland. We follow the I-84, the Banfield Freeway, which is actually sort of a serpentine flow because it actually flowed around Rocky Butte and then flowed slightly to the north to avoid Mount Tabor down into downtown Portland. On the west end of the flood channel that flowed around Rocky Butte, we call it Sullivan Sculpt. Sullivan was a farmer who homesteaded that area in the 1800s. Now it has a freeway and the light rail track as well as a regular railroad track. It's 60 feet deep today, and it actually has been filled in some since the settlers were first here. The mouth of the Columbia River was actually 50 to 100 miles west of where it is now, with a lot of the rocks from all the way from Montana, all the way down through the gorge, out into the Pacific Ocean. As far as Northern California, we find those sediments down at the Mendocino Trough off of Northern California. It left so much sand and gravel at the mouth of the Columbia River that it was actually a navigation hazard and was considered the deadliest river crossing in the world for a while. Since the water was 200 to 400 feet lower during the Ice Age, the mouth of the Columbia was actually about 50 miles or more out to sea.
How do we know how far these floods extended? They came into the Portland area and they went all the way to Eugene. But how were we able to tell that? Erratics, which are rocks that do not have a local source, were found. Ira Allison, many years ago, went and located and mapped the erratics that were in the Willamette Valley. Many of them were at the 400-foot elevation. Behind me are granite erratics. They used to be called glacial erratics, but we didn't have glaciers down here. They came in on icebergs. When the ice dam broke, it had incorporated into the ice rocks from the northern Rockies, like granite, feldspar, and argillite. So when we find those, we know that those are erratics. The most interesting of our erratics is 15.5 tons of nickel iron. We believe that the Willamette Meteorite landed on the ice dam up in Canada and was floated down to this area in West Lynn. There's no crater where the meteorite landed, and there were some other granite erratics found with it. Our largest erratic in Oregon is called the Bellevue Erratic, and it is at the Erratic Rock Natural Site between McMinnville and Sheridan on Highway 18. It is close to 100 tons of argillite, a metamorphosed mudstone.
One of the prominent features about the Ice Age is how it impacted animal migrations, causing many animals to move south. As the Ice Age ended, many of these animals are impacted by the dramatic climate change. Several species went extinct, such as mammoths and mastodons. In the Willamette Valley, as the floodwaters came and went, animals would move into the area, but could not be sustained. In recent years, extinct animal remains have been found throughout the valley, including mastodon in Tualatin.
Rumors were that they found one in 1846 south of the Fred Meyer store, that they had found the tusk, and they dug up the mastodon, half a skeleton of it, When I heard that story, it got me interested. I went to Portland State College, and one day I walked out of the cafeteria, and here were these bones displayed in a display case. And the professor said, well, you know, we don't have room for those bones. Do you want them? For some reason, I felt like, yeah, I'll take them. This is the site in Tualatin where the Tualatin mastodon bones were found. It was just a garden, and the marshal was digging an irrigation ditch for the Thompson house that was along the street. When he discovered the mastodon molar, told John George about it, and when George was a senior at Portland State, he decided to dig it up to get a on his thesis. There's an opportunity that is unique to the whole state of Oregon and maybe the area to tell the story of the Ice Age to the point that our younger generation can understand them. I lived here all my life and didn't know until maybe 20, 30 years ago what the story is.
This discovery also inspired a land developer to include a model of the mastodon in the new shopping center in Tualatin, and facilitated a new Tualatin River Greenway trail behind the shopping center.
It starts just east of the Tualatin Library, behind the stores known as Cabela's, 2 miles now. And then if we connect to the Willamette Falls, it's going to be 12, 15 miles.
Finding fossils from the Ice Age has inspired many locals to go hunting for more.
I grew up in this area, McMinnville, and spent my whole life in the valley here. When I was about 12 years old, I was playing down on the Yamhill River outside of McMinnville and came home with a strange-looking rock. That was the start of a lifelong obsession of mine with the Pleistocene fossils in our local area. These floodwaters covered the Willamette Valley at this location to a depth of about 300 feet higher than we are right now. Rivers would all cut their way back through and braid across this large flat valley, and what we're seeing is evidence of that down here. The megafauna came back. This would have been like an American Serengeti. This section of the river is real shallow and broad. It acts as a fossil trap for us with all of these trees, branches, and snags through here. We'll find a lot of small fossils in here, and we work our way upstream through this area and mark every one that we have. Quartzite. It's a glacial erratic. That one came all the way from the Rocky Mountains on an iceberg, melted off of the iceberg, dropped to the ground, and was here for you to find. Look at that. What is it?
Mammoth.
That's the first time anybody's ever seen or touched that. Somewhere right along here, we've got a mammoth or a mastodon wearing out of the bank, and we've been picking up pieces of him for 20 some years. And we found part of his pelvis, part of his skull, part of his jaw, quite a few pieces of his tusk. First trip down here this summer, we found a articulating condyle right in here. So they get midstream out there where we've got a snorkel or scuba to clear up. We've found pieces of mammoth actually embedded in that sand. This case contains the partial skull of a Columbian mammoth that we excavated in McMinnville. Every bone that we find tells us something about the environment, tells us about what was going on. The next fossil case down here has the remains of a giant ground sloth. We had ground sloths in the Willamette Valley that would stand about 6 to 7 feet high at the shoulders. We've recovered the femur of a Harlan's ground sloth, skull fragments. This is a mandibular section, part of the jawbone, vertebra, almost an entire set of teeth. We have a rich history of many, many, many different types of animals. Many of them are extinct in our own backyard. All you've got to do is look for it.
Another local hotspot for finding Ice Age fossils has been at the Woodburn High School, a few miles south of Tualatin. The first find of these bones were found by accident by utility workers. After the initial find, local scientists descended on the property to find out more about this great location.
There were some different
scientists, paleontologists, archaeologists from Oregon State University and the Institute for Archaeological Studies were here, and they had discovered an ancient bog that was on the Woodburn High School campus. I was pretty excited about joining in on that because I was a new teacher and I wanted to be able to have something authentic for kids to be able to experience. And we find all sorts of animals and plants that existed here in Woodburn at that time. Behind me, you can see obviously is one of the bigger critters that we've uncovered. There were a lot of bison that were walking and roaming around the Willamette Valley as the Ice Age was ending. There aren't any more now, they're gone. But this was probably one of the last of the few that remained in the valley before they all went extinct. And this was all found by high school kids in Woodburn. We found bones of muskrats, turtles, frogs, ducks, beaver, and then lots of different plants that lived here. Fascinating about the Woodburn area, it was wetter than it is today, which if you can imagine that. The low-lying areas were bogs, were marshes, were lots of standing water. And it created ecosystems again where animals came in. The floods came in, they devastated the area, but they didn't kill all the animals. There were animals that were up on higher levels, and I'm sure some of these animals were able to get out of the way of the incoming water. So they survived, and when the waters receded, they moved back in and repopulated the area and continued their existence. This right here is the scapula that goes with this humerus. So that would have sat right there on top of that humerus. And so as we've done these bones, we've realized we had a pretty big bison that died here in Woodburn. We're being told that this might be the largest bison skeleton that's ever been found. These are the sizes of the bones that we're finding. Some are very large and some are extremely small. This is where the digs are done in Woodburn. We dig down here every year. About 15 feet below where I'm standing right now are the Missoula Flood deposits, that gray silty layer, and then above them are all those other layers, the layer with the bones that was presenting area, and right above that is the boggy area, and above that is the foresty area, and then above that is clay.
From a tribal perspective, we say that we've been here in Western Oregon since time immemorial, or a time that no one can remember. What's important about that when we're trying to understand how long people have been here in the Willamette Valley or Western Oregon is that we as Native people remember events that happened a really long time ago.
We have stories of Missoula Floods, we have stories of people out here at volcanoes, during tsunamis that have been recorded through, various means, and we know we were here before that.
The people that were here were hunting the megafauna of the late Pleistocene. They were shooting camels, the ancient horse that went extinct at the end of the Pleistocene. In other words, environmental conditions were markedly different at the time of the Missoula Floods.
The oral histories that speak to the floods, the earliest written down version of those was told by a man named William Hartless, a Marys River Kalapuya man. And in his stories that he told about the flood, slow enough that people could run out in front of them. Also talked about areas of land that were out of the floods themselves and where people actually sought refuge during the floods. And there's even reference about traveling back and forth across the lake in canoes to get to their family that had been separated during the flood event. Tribal groups prior to settlement interacted in all the ways that people have across the world. They intermarried, they warred with each other, they celebrated, they worked things out. There's no way life was lived at a grand scale.
The Kalapuyans had a very wild agrarian society. In the summer times, they would move around to various encampments, sometimes in their canoes, sometimes walking across the land to go to various fields where they knew they had different root crops.
People often had winter villages where their storehouses where they brought goods back to. And then they had gathering where they would regularly or routinely go to the same place every year, every 3 years, 5 years. They would not only go themselves, but they would often meet up with tribal people from other places.
Willamette Falls was the crossroads of Western Oregon.
It was the most important fishery in the region.
The Clackamas people there had lots and lots of salmon that they had either smoked or dried. Those kind of things would be traded. They would trade, lots of camas that was pre-cooked for this pre-prepared salmon that you could just eat.
One of the greatest gifts that the Creator gave us as tribal people is Tamanoas, which is also known today as the Willamette Meteorite.
It was a very special object, and it's very likely that it came in on the bottom of an iceberg during the Missoula Floods. And when that iceberg melted, that meteorite landed on a hillside between West Lynn and Lake Oswego.
For generations, our people worshipped, celebrated, prayed at Tamanoas. As an important place, it's the perfect blending of all elements, right? It's made of the sky, the earth, fire, and water actually collects in the cupules of the meteorite.
The Molallas have stories of using meteorite for gathering sort of hunting power, and they would dip their sort of arrows in the waters that collected in the pits in the meteor, and they would get hunting power. And so tribes nowadays do the same thing. Grand Ron goes to American History Museum in New York City, and every other year now, and talks to it, does a ceremony, and we believe that it listens to us because it's used to our original language and stuff.
Our stories are not just ones of science, but also ones of description, and cast our characters within them, like Coyote and Meadowlark, and all of these other protagonists that teach us about the ways of things and how the world works. So when people come here to visit our homelands, what I want them to see is I want them to see the richness in our stories, the way that we understand the landscape itself, not just through science, but also through our culture, through our practices and our beliefs.
With the impact of fossils, ancient cultures, and water impacting the Tualatin region, the local government saw an opportunity to showcase the area for those wanting to find out more.
Tualatin's fortunate to have a history with ice age floods and megafauna occurring right in this area. They showed up in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Later on, the Ice Age Floods National Geologic Trail was enacted by Congress. Tualatin saw the opportunity to partner with the foundation and the National Park Service and others. Tualatin may be a destination location while people were traveling and exploring the Ice Age floods in the Willamette Valley. We've got this Greenway Trail, we've got Iback Park with a play area that interprets the floods and other history, megafauna. We've got the Tualatin Historical Society, we've got the Tualatin Public Library. We have created exhibits and programs and features. This Tualatin River Greenway Trail is a destination for families. They like the natural beauty of the area, and they are mesmerized by the natural and cultural interpretive facilities. There is this section of the path that has colored concrete and embedded glass, and that helps tell the story. Then there are replicas of megafauna.
Tualatin is at the crossroads of the Ice Age Floods, and we're very happy to be a stop on the Ice Age Floods National Geologic Trail, where people can see some of the things that were impacted by the floods, including local landforms and some of the animals that lived during that time period. I think that is the only library skeleton as part of it. This skeleton was dug up less than a mile from the library here in our town.
If you're exploring the Ice Age Floods Trail, you're driving past Tualatin, you'll want to stop in Tualatin. It's a beautiful community, a great place to stretch your legs and let your kids explore, whether it's at a park or on this Greenway Trail or at the Heritage Center. There's a lot of information about the Ice Age floods and the Pleistocene megafauna of the Willamette Valley and the Tualatin Valley.
As awareness and impact of the Ice Age flood has grown, enthusiasts and scientists have joined forces. They created an unofficial nonprofit to promote the incredible geologic features from eastern Washington to the bottom of the Willamette Valley in Oregon.
The Ice Age Floods Institute was formed by some scientists who thought this was such a large, amazing story it needed to be told to the public. So they formed the Ice Age Floods Institute, and presented to Congress the idea of making a trail so that people could follow the Ice Age floods. It was actually signed into law in 2009 and is now being implemented. Eventually, we will have kiosks and visitor centers all along the way, and Tualatin is one of the first spots on the National Geologic Trail.
The Missoula Floods carved our landscape, shaping our history, our use of the land. The Ice Age Flood National Geologic Trail of the U.S. Park Service will introduce thousands to the story of the flood. So that, Sheila, can you hear me?
Yes. It was
That-
good. I saw the whole thing.
Well, good. And hopefully everybody, we had over 90 people
Yes.
at one time. So just to kind of conclude this, you guys are some of the first people to actually see this video that we have put together.
Fantastic.
And it's going to be the video for our Ice Age Flood Visitor Center, covering those 4 areas: the big time Missoula floods, local Missoula floods, the animals and plants that were here, and then especially the Native Americans that were there. And we thank David Lewis and David Harrelson for those great quotes and stories that they told there. Kyle Justice is and Compel Media is the organization that put this thing together. They're very, very professional, and incredible footage and a lot of drone footage, which was really, really helpful there too. My dream and the dream of our board is that every kid in the South Portland area will get a chance to come and visit the visitor center, see Tutu Tuala, our mastodon, or eventually we will have a visitor center where they can do that. They can watch the video and learn about all of these 4 major areas that we had talked about. I still remember as a kid growing up in Beaverton that we took field trips to the McLaughlin House in Oregon City, but this should be natural history. And I think this is the beginning of many of these things. And so I thank you very much for the chance to present a little bit about the Ice Age Flood Geological Trail, what it is, and our small part of it in the big picture. Thanks.
Thank you. That was great. May I also mention that we're planning a field trip. GSOC is planning a field trip across the Willamette Valley, and we're going to start in my backyard, which is Bellevue Erratic. And then we're going to work our way across the Willamette Valley. So look for that coming up next summer. We're going to do that field trip. So
Cheryl McCaffrey asked if this video is available right now. And the answer is no. You guys are some of the first people to see it because we are council of Tualatin. They put up some of the money for this. In fact, a good portion of the money for this. And so we are on the agenda for the December 11th meeting or something like that to discuss it. And everybody on the council has been given a copy of this one. Eventually, you'll be able to see it at the library, and then eventually we'll put it on our website for our and anybody can watch it because it's great. It just kind of shows a little bit about our area and our part in the big picture. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Scott, there's a question from Anna St. John back at the first part of your talk.
Oh.
She says, hi, Scott, is PSU working with Jim O'Connor at USGS mapping the locations and provinces of the erratics?
Yes, and Anna, great to hear you. I mean, Anna was one of our star students at Portland State. We've been friends for years and years. Yes, Jim O'Connor is now the keeper of the records of anytime we find an erratic, we send him the latitude, longitude, etc., and what type of rock it was. And so he is the keeper of that. And he's doing a great job. And so Jim is one of the major players in the whole Ice Age flood thing. Yep.
And Lawrence Jordan is asking, can you speak about the lake in Oswego? What are the features that indicate that it is a part of the floods?
The Lake Oswego a part of the floods? Well, I mean, that whole area was a depression, and then the flood waters came through. 40 different floods came through and eroded it, and you have this huge fan to the west. And where did that fan come from? It came from the Lake Oswego area. So Mother Nature is shouting out that it was formed by flood after flood after flood, eroding things away and depositing them to the west side. So hopefully that's what the question was.
Yeah, Lawrence, if you have further question, feel free to unmute and clarify. And Peter Sampson says, did you say that most of the erratics in the valley are now believed to be delivered fluvially rather than ice rafted? How do you tell the difference?
No. All of the ones that are like granite and argillite from faraway places, we believe are all ice rafted. But those ones in Lake Oswego, almost all of them were basalts. And so they probably traveled along the bottom, especially the ones that are the local boring lavas.
The boring volcanics.
Yeah, the boring lavas are all local. They were not ice rafted in. Those have been bouncing. They came down off of the edges and off of the volcanoes and then were deposited here. So, but yeah, we have ice rafted ones all up and down the valley, but then right in town, we have a lot of the basalt ones that are there.
So you've got a lot of nice kudos that you can take a look at there. And I don't see any more questions in the chat. If anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, feel free to do that.
Quick question. You have all these sedimentary type deposits from the Missoula floods. How will it affect Portland during a big earthquake?
Well, and that's a great question. What you build your house on, if it's built on sand versus bedrock, it will respond differently. North Portland, Alameda Ridge will do pretty well because it's well drained and there will be no liquefaction. But if you're right next to the river, you have for liquefaction during a big earthquake like the subduction zone 1, a combination of high water table and sandy parent material. That's the kiss of death, and you will slide into the river. And so those areas some areas will do well, some won't.
I'm in the St. John's area, and we're putting together with PBEM Community Resiliency District, and we're looking at the possibility of forming the Island Republic of St. John's or the next earthquake.
The Island Republic?
Because there's going to be a lot of movement all around us, and the railroad cut and railroad tunnel would then block us from getting out of there or getting any support coming in. So,
Scott,
the Alameda Ridge.
Scott, would you explain what the University of Oregon Andrew Baum is finding with the Mastodon? It's making news.
Yeah, so Yvonne is also on the board, our board in Tualatin. And Andrew Baum is down at the University Museum down in Eugene. And he has taken samples of the mastodon tusk and then some of the bones. And we're finding that it's a different species of mastodon. And so we not only do we have a very special mastodon skeleton, but we have a very probably a new species, which is not found in this area before.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Anything else? Well, we'll just close. You can close it right there, and I'll turn it back over to Clark, and then he can close the meeting. But thank you very much for the chance to fill in.
Brought him to the